I'd like to thank everybody for joining us here today with the Supply Chain Security and Risk Management Virtual Summit. Today, we're going to be speaking with Brad Elrod. Brad has a wealth of industry experience and knowledge, and you can read his bio and everything that Brad has accomplished down below us. We only have about 20 minutes here that I want to speak with Brad about some of this experience and knowledge that he has. So I want to get right into some of the questions and some of the experience that he has. So please take time to read his bio. Brad has over 27 years of experience. He's worked with several government organizations, Customs Border Protection, the CTPAT programs. He's worked with Authorized Economic Operators, TSA, and even some pilot programs that the government puts out. So we want to talk about today how working with these organizations helps companies like the pharmaceutical industry to actually achieve better supply chain security programs. And Brad, first of all, I'd like to thank you for your service. Brad is a graduate of West Point, served in the United States Army. Thank you very much for your service to the country, and we look forward to hearing some of your experience. Thank you very much for being here today.
George, thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Brad, please just think of your experience. You were in the pharmaceutical industry for almost 27 years, so just kind of take us through the experience that you had from 27 years ago and bring us up to today and how that supply chain security programs have changed.
Certainly. A lot of my experience early on in the pharmaceutical industry was actually working with transportation and hazardous materials transportation and doing some things there, learning regulations, working with DOT and other agencies, obviously, to move materials. I had moved into compliance work with customs compliance in the spring of 2001. And as we know, the world sort of changed a few months later on 9/11. And suddenly customs compliance became a security program. And I was really involved at that time with one pharmaceutical company where I was helping to establish truly from a startup operation what the CTPAT program was. We weren't in the first round of companies, but we were in the very early round of companies. I would say at that point, there were probably only about 10 or 15 companies had already been selected and approved, and they were looking to reach out to other companies that had good customs compliance programs looking to participate. I often joke we got an invitation to volunteer for the program. And I always joked around and said, it was sort of a Don Corleone invitation, an offer you couldn't refuse. So we went about, and actually it was a good program to get involved with at that time. And what we found out was those programs in the early stages, people weren't sure what they wanted or didn't want to do with this program. The government was obviously looking for a singular objective at that time. So make sure that weapons of mass destruction or bombs or items of terror could not be imported into the country. And they were looking to help get industry to help plug the holes in areas where they couldn't see. And so we did at that time volunteered, as are all the companies in the CTPAT program are volunteer companies. Nobody's twisting your arm to join them. But it's a program where we started to establish supply chain security programs beyond a lock on the back of the trailer. Because quite frankly, the risk before that was always considered, if you had a hot product, would it get stolen or pilfered while en route by, your vendors, or just people, various exposures. And the CTPAT program, not a perfect program, was a good start at how to do that. And if you internalize the ideas of what they were trying to do at that time, you really could that protected your product while it was protecting the supply chains. And those supply chain programs is that's what the Customs and Border Protection was looking to do with the CT program. The European Union came out with the Authorized Economic Operator programs. And you started looking at the similarities between the two, and they're pretty common, as are most of the security programs, supply chain security programs around the globe. Those customs programs, and they're looking to be mutually recognized. Those that are currently mutually recognized around the globe. So we established a program it became important to integrate that into our overall logistics process. So it's not, in my mind, they don't stand alone, or they don't, if they do, they don't work very well.
And different organizations, did they get together to collaborate to ensure that their policies that they were trying to enforce were kind of standardized globally, and they weren't asking organizations in one country to fulfill one set of requirements while in another country it's a completely different set of requirements? Or did they find that it was basically a standard issue that they could go with globally, unlike, say, the airline industry, which doesn't seem to really be able to come up with a great standard?
I think there's definitely was an attempt to do that. I mean, the United States, working as part of a member of the World Customs Organization, helped to develop the safe framework at that time, and this is back in the mid 2000s. Started to develop the safe framework, which really were the first set of international security standards that were put together by a common organization for this purpose. I mean, there have always been supply chain security operations that looked at, transportation by air, and those were sometimes commercial. IATA's a commercial operation. They were looking at that in conjunction with ICAO, the various, the UN programs versus the commercial programs. So there were some programs that existed, but they went to this U.S. Or the World Customs Organization and they used the safe framework for putting out these standards. And then those are the same standards that were used to establish programs, at least as a basis. So there was a commonality among almost all of the various programs, be it CTPAT or the Partners in Transaction or Authorized Economic Operators. And there are several AEO programs around the world, which tend to be a little bit broader than simply security. It's also customs compliance. The U.S. was a little bit different in their approach. They had a customs compliance program with the importer self-assessment program, and then they had CTPAT. And there's work going on today to combine those programs. So, excuse me, again, that harmonization across an international playing field is becoming more a reality today than it was, 10, 15 years ago.
And when your organization is complying with the new CTPAT program, you learn about your own organization. Were there a lot of areas that you found that you were failing at in supply chain security, or did you find that you already had a pretty good program in place and it was just a matter of now being in compliance with government regulation?
I think we in some areas we had pretty good programs in place, but they were very localized and they were not integrated. So they didn't talk to each other very well. So we had good accountability programs, but they didn't necessarily work outside of the region they were in. So once I was at the second pharmaceutical company I worked with, and the program, we found that standard care or some level of protection or policy, program, procedure that people could follow. And when I inventoried the company, I found that they had 15 different standards of care. Now think about that. If you have standards, you do not have a standard. And so you were having to balance against different types of regional differences and everything else. So one of the biggest policies that I put in place when I was at this company was building a set standards of care document that was common throughout the company and around the globe. It was probably the single biggest benefit that the CTPAT program led us into. Now, that wasn't a requirement of CTPAT, although it helped us meet those standards, because I could take the CTPAT standards and the other AEO standards from around the globe, build that into my policy, my standards of care, if you will, and then use that as our standard internal. Because you'll find, especially in large organizations, but it's true in small ones as well, if you have a company policy, it's much easier to enforce on your own people than it is a government policy, unless it's regulated. And that's one of the important things to recognize, is that the CTPAT program is not regulated. There's no regulation for it. It's a voluntary program. And that has its benefits and it has its drawbacks. But the benefit of it is it allows it to be very flexible. and very accepting of new standards as they come in without having to go back for a regulatory update or change. And, especially in this country, you can recognize that getting something changed in the regulations, given the political climate we've seen over the last, is very tough. It's very partisan politics, and nobody wants to change anything. Nobody will say anything bad about security, but they don't necessarily want to put policy to paper and then make it enforceable. So when it's a voluntary program, you can come up with new ideas, and it really did encourage cooperation among the member companies of the CTPAT program. And you started seeing the companies actually generate standards that the CBP would evaluate and accept and either approve for your use. And if it was good enough, it was what they would consider a best practice, they start building it into their program.
And when you started to implement these programs, though, as far as vendors, carriers, and different organizations, was it a lot easier to get them to comply with your programs, though, when you said it was government regulated, not just a company policy?
It was, and the way we went about doing that, and the way most companies do, is you look for member companies to do business with. So you're looking to your freight forwarders, your carriers to be CTPAT partners if they're eligible to be, especially in international transportation. It's a fairly common. I cannot think of too many major international forwarders and brokers that would not be CTPAT partners. It's just, it'd be counterproductive to them because it would have eliminated them from being even considered for us to use if they were not a CTPAT partner.
And what's the difference between a CTPAT program, for example, and the pilot supply chain program that you were recently working on, where is it just that CTPAT only cares about cargo coming into the port, and then the other supply chain security programs that the government mandates take it from the borders to its destination?
They're different. They're different because the way the programs come about. The pilot program that we were doing with the FDA was designed to protect and understand the pharmaceutical supply chain. So, and you got to remember, the CTPAT program is for everything. And so the peculiarities of shipping lug nuts is a lot different than shipping vaccines. So you can imagine the differences there. So the FDA is looking at making sure you're protecting the efficacy and the sterility of the product, temperature controls, everything else that goes into that. So it's a security program, but it's also a program designed to have compliance with the FDA regulations while product is in transportation. Historically, the FDA would tell you it has to be, you have to protect it while it's in transit. And by them, they're talking about protection in terms of excursions and conditions. Logical extension then to take that and say, well, if you're going to do that, you should also make sure nobody's tampering with it, trying to either or to defer or to steal it, or there's a host of other issues that program was meant to and designed to do. I would tell you that the FDA pilot program was a good opportunity for industry to work with the FDA to start to understand what their needs are. And what it turned out, I wouldn't say the pilot, I think, was actually successful, but it was clear, if you will, because what it did was showed them a lot of things they didn't want to do or couldn't do, how they needed to change it so that it is morphed. The pilot, as it was operated, does not have the same security features as CTPAT. If you could combine the two, it would do that. And they took that away as a lessons learned. And they're looking to implement it. To me, securing the product is a pretty common consideration, but you have to understand the direction that each of these agencies come from. And so initially, while the FDA was aware of what the CBP and CTPAT program was all about, they weren't really worried about that. They sort of considered, well, that's already done with CTPAT, so we don't have to worry about it. We're wanting to secure this from an efficacy point of view, if you will, the sort of more of a typical regulatory role that the FDA would play. As a practitioner and as a guy out in the field, some of the things that they were requesting, I think it might save the product, but it actually compromised the security. It met one need, but it compromised another.
Could you give us an example?
Yeah, one of the examples of the program and the pilot, and again, this is one of the things they definitely took to heart. They looked at how they're going to do this going forward. I'm not sure if they've decided 100% how they want to do it yet, but they wanted to define the security plan of this. Is, you were having to go back to not only your primary suppliers, but your secondary and tertiary suppliers, and that whole supply chain had to be defined. And by defined, they wanted to know who's moving it, what road was it going on, and what was a specific route every single time. Well, there were a couple of problems with that. From a early security perspective, if you're doing the same thing every time, it becomes too predictable and is now using it to risk that you didn't have before. Because if you have to use the same lane every time, there's no opportunity to play shell games with the product. No needle in the haystack approach. Absolutely. Which is really one of the best. I'm sorry?
I said absolutely, because randomness is a layer of security.
Yeah, you're right. And they removed that. Now, again, their intention was good. A compliance point of view, because the FDA compliance programs were always built around very consistent processes. And that makes sense if you're making the product and the sterility issues and all of that. It makes perfectly good sense.
Sure.
Where from a security point of view, it becomes far too predictable and not very random. And it tends over time, it will weaken your security process.
Sure.
They took that as a lessons learned out of that program.
And that's a good lesson to learn. Now, Brad, you've taken 4 companies, I believe, to CTPAT level 3, tier 3 certification. Please tell us,
right,
because you've worked with Latin America, Europe, Asia, and the United States, please tell us, when you go to start helping a program into those tiers or with their CTPAT programs, what is the low-hanging fruit? What are the risks that you generally see first that you can say, if you just shore up this process, or if you just add this to your process, you immediately are in compliance with a better security standard? What are kind of the low-hanging fruits that you can kind of give everybody for the risks that you saw common to each region, if there were any?
Well, point. Initially, the very best thing you can do is make sure you have a legitimate standard in place and everybody has it available and follows it. You know how to measure what you're looking for and putting programs in place and procedures in place internal to your company. That's probably the number one thing most people don't have. They have good local, security. The system is available to protect their building or their local region, because that's where they're used to working. But if you're shipping out of that region to another part of the world, you have to be available to do that in a way that is just not going to have the same repetition across other parts of the world. So it becomes number one over all that process. The second is making sure you're vetting your vendors, the people that are, unless you have your own trucking company, which I don't know of any pharmaceutical company or very few that do. And if they do, it's a local regional thing. You're not, that's not the business of a pharmaceutical company. So we need to be aware of that. So you're looking at who your partners in the supply chain are. Who are your forwarders? And so, you look for, are they CTPAT, line entry requirement? And at least they've been validated and that they have procedures that should meet that. You still have an obligation to go out and audit them, check them, make sure they're doing what they say they're doing. And frankly, you want to do that from a pharmaceutical quality control point of view as well. But those are two of the things that I would say are the easiest and best things to do
Brad, when you look at vetting your suppliers and your vendors, do you only vet tier one, or how deep do you go? Do you vet the tier two, tier three suppliers also and vendors?
Yeah, we would like to. I'd like to tell you, yes, we did that absolutely every time. We would do that on high volume, high risk products for sure. We would go back as far as we could go back. What we ended up doing that allowed us to get better reach into those areas, we trained our quality inspectors to look for. There's no way you're going to take a quality inspector and make them a security inspector on a 2-hour class somewhere. But what we could do is have them be an initial set of eyes and ears, and they're looking around, and they have an ongoing relationship with those suppliers. So when they're working with the actual suppliers and doing their audit, and they can tell me they're looking for, do they have access controls? Do they have, guards, gates, fences, things that are obvious to most anybody? Are they going to be able to tell you that it was what type of system they were using and how good it worked and all these other things? No. Have some level of assistance. And we would do we would ask for, as part of the vetting process, just in the procurement vetting process, we would supply them with a security questionnaire. They would answer it. At least we would have what they said they were doing. And we would ask, are you members of a CTPAT or other authorized economic operator program or some other state-sponsored security program? We would also then, if there was any red flags, we would go and look at them. And there were vendors that we eliminated in that process. These guys aren't even close. And now that gets hard when it's, quite frankly, a lot of times by the time you got to the sourcing requirement, these decisions had been made. One of the things that we found, and that was very helpful also in this process, was we built into the contract language with all contracts. So we went back to our legal and security, our procurement people, and put security language into our contracts, and making sure they had a supply chain security program. And if they were eligible to be members of one of the supply chain security programs, like CTPAT, that they would join it. At the very least, they would meet those standards. So that was actually written into the language of our contracts with all of our suppliers and vendors. Now, obviously, when we got down to our transporters, guys carrying it, we vetted every one of those. We consider those guys supply partners as well. Obviously, they're not providing the material, but that's sometimes the biggest opportunity for exposure is while it's moving. It's not under a direct camera somewhere all the time. And it's outside of the gates and fences of the world. So it's on the road and at ports, and, ports around the world have never been known to be something as pristine as they ought to be. So absolutely, we always would check those.
And Brad, one thing you're pointing out that I really want, a lot of people, especially when you go globally, in Asia and different parts of the world, where I see security as a silo. It's like security people, they stay with security. They don't get involved with legal to start talking about, let's look at our terms of our agreements. They don't get involved with procurement as much to make sure that when we bring in a new vendor or supplier that they've vetted and have those processes there. Who else, what other parts of your organization internally did you have to work closely with to ensure that you were in compliance with these programs besides legal, procurement, and security?
Well, we worked with the insurance risk management group. We would work with manufacturing groups. We'd do a lot of that. And you make a good point. And one of the things that I've always stressed in sort of in the world I'm working in today, it's what I am trying to do is to show people that security is not a standalone operation. It has to be integrated. It has to be part of the culture of your company and how you do stuff, especially if you're working with sensitive types of materials. And sensitive, and by that I mean it could be high-priced electronics, it could be pharmaceuticals, it could be food, it could be a lot of areas where you can affect the well-being of somebody. Consumable products, things that you ingest into your body to a higher standard, and they have to be, because if they go bad or die. And you don't want to have that happen because of somebody taking your product. So you're going to want to make sure that the security program is integrated in just to your distribution program, to your manufacturing program, And there's a lot of activity, especially in the pharmaceutical world, but also in other parts of industry, where you have to identify and follow each individual, the serialization programs for pharmaceutical. And you got similar programs that will be quickly be coming out with in the food industry. And you have programs for, electronics, and, you everything comes out of electronic industry. And if you have that, seeing that as part of your security program too. It's not being done for security purposes, but it can be used for that purpose. And if you have integrated your programs correctly, the serialization product is not just a track and trace tool. It can become an inventory management tool. It can be a security tool. It can be a product authentication tool. Reinvent it every time you do it. You just have to make it the aspects that you need it able to recognize it in your process. And so that's what, as I said, what I tried to institute inside of the companies I was working with, especially over the last 5 to 10 years. But more than that is just seeing where the industry is going, and other industries as well. If you don't integrate your security applications, you can't, one of the sayings, and many people have heard me say this before, I says, simply putting a lock on something isn't security. Locks will keep your friends out. And you can take that at a very literal level or a more figurative level. If you're doing something on the skin of whatever your business is, right along the peripheral, once they get through it, then there's no security. So you have to have that layers of security, and different things have to be in place in order to make it a valuable part of your business. And security aspects, knowing where your product is and what condition it is in, can be part of your distribution management process. It can be part of your manufacturing process. It can be part of your quality program. So all of the different people that have to be involved should recognize that what you're doing for security purposes should, not be considered solely and independently a security function. It has to be integrated.
Sure, absolutely. No, Brett, one more question. Actually, I probably have 2 more questions for you. But when you're in the security role and you're receiving a lot of intelligence, let's say you're hearing information about increased threats, even if you have a natural disaster happen somewhere. Were you able to go to the transportation managers and the logistics personnel and tell them of the new information you have that could force them maybe to make changes in the logistics for those organizations? Or are those more siloed? Or are they so structured they won't make those changes unless they actually have a loss first?
Well, I would tell you, from a security role, that's always is always a consideration and a concern that you're not taking. I would tell you, in my role, especially my last role in Pfizer, and Pfizer was very good about this. I was actually within our logistics group. I was assigned and worked within our logistics and distribution program as the sole security person, but still within that group. So when I had concerns, I could raise it within the logistics organization, and that tended to have that a little bit closer bond. So it worked a little better. I'm not saying that's the perfect answer, but it was a very good one for that situation. At the very least, your logistics people should be regularly sitting down and talking to your distribution logistics team and letting them know that, I can provide you with threat analysis and information that they make judgments on. In this day and age, there's a lot you can do with business continuity. If you have a business continuity team, you should be a part of that as part of the security team, and feeding that threat analysis into it. And whether it's, as you pointed out, it could be a natural disaster. Who would have thought we would have a volcano disrupting Northern Europe like we've had twice in the last 10 or 12 years? And so you have to look at that and say, can anticipate that? What do we do when we start to anticipate threats, other threats that are changing the scope and landscape of the logistics programs in different regions of the world? And I know we've talked about before, and other people have recognized the Syrian refugee issue in Europe is a major concern. You have this huge immigrant population moving any way they can to get to a safer location. And you can look at that and look at the criticality of what those people are trying to do, and you can feel bad for them, but that doesn't mean you want them to integrate their problems to be your problems and make your transportation system, stowaways have become an issue, especially throughout, Western Europe.
Sure.
People trying to get to safer ground. And again, while I could feel sorry for them, I don't think their intent is to necessarily steal or rob product, but they do damage product every time they get to. Even if you can save, 95 or 99% of the product, you've got to go through a whole litany of quality control checks and everything else to make sure that the product is still usable. So those kinds of threats should be integrated in, and they come from a security role, not from a logistics role.
Absolutely, very good. And again, that goes right. What other organizations do you have to work with, remain in your silo in order to have a very effective supply chain security program? Brad, the last question I have for you, really, when you have your Tier 3 CTPAT certified, but in an industry such as the pharmaceutical industry, there are a lot of mergers and acquisitions. So it could easily be you just achieved your Tier 3 certification, all of a sudden you buy a company and they have to become part of your supply chain, and they don't have any certification for CTPAT, for example. They may have operations in countries that you formerly didn't have any operations in. How long does organizations like CTPAT give you to bring them up to speed so you don't lose your Tier 3 certification?
Well, technically, you have in-text validation. Realistically, if you want to be honest with the program, and as a partner, you should be, you need to probably take a full evaluation within the first 90 days. What are the problems? What are the problems? And how do you segregate? One of the things that we did, when we went through several major mergers with companies that had CTPAT programs. If they have a CTPAT program, you can maintain them separately and work the two companies together. And that was one of the challenges I had. We merged with a company. We were a Tier 3 and they were a Tier 2. So what I did was I took that first year, and because they weren't due for validation for a year, the company that we acquired. And I worked in that year to upgrade their systems to their procedures into ours. We took what they had that were good, and we did a lot to upgrade what they didn't have that was good. And we put them together, and it takes some time to sort of integrate into, two cultures of two companies. But, I think the nature of the CTPAT program in particular is that it is a partnership program. And if you engage with your supply chain security specialist at CBP, they will help you to determine how best to proceed. And I've worked with half a dozen different specialists over the 15 years that there's been 8 or 9 different with the 2 different companies. And they all work with you to define what you need to do, and they will give you some leeway on time if what you're asking for is reasonable. And that's the nice thing about a partnership. And a lot of people will say, you don't get anything out of the CTPAT program. It's the benefits are negligible, and the amount of work you put into it is far exceeds the benefits. But I would tell you that the amount of work you put into it is more valuable internal than it is external.
Sure.
You probably, if you really follow the precepts of what CTPAT is trying to do, you'll do more to help build your internal supply chain security program. You'll do more to protect your product. You'll do more to recover your product in the event you have an incident where somebody steals something than you would have ever had the ability to do without the CTPAT program. So you use it a little bit as a stick and carrot philosophy. It becomes beneficial when you can take examples I did. We were seeing on average around worldwide, not in the U.S. but globally, we were seeing cargo theft incidents at 70 to 80 events a year. Some of them were small. Most of them were small. It was amounting to about $8 to $10 million a year. in product loss. Just pure, that was the value of the product that was stolen. Even if we got it back, we were never going to use it because it had been compromised. So we were losing $8 to $10 million a year of product. Down to the last full year that I was at this company, we were down to about $250,000 and down to about 30 to 33 events.
Wow.
And some of those were just, but all of that was possible because we had a CTPAT program that allowed us to build a supply chain security initiative and put procedures in place that we could hold people accountable to. And by doing that, we saw that kind of advantage. And that had nothing to do with CBP or the CTPAT program, but because we followed those precepts, it protected us internally. That's a hard one to measure normally. So you got to find out which stats you want to keep, but it is an effective program for that kind of consideration.
And that return on the time and effort that's placed into becoming CTPAT certified, obviously right there, you have a great ROI that you can go to somebody and say, these are the kinds of results we achieve through getting these certifications and improving our supply chain security programs.
Oh, absolutely. It's the age-old problem for anybody that works security is, if you do your job perfectly, nothing happens.
Yeah.
And nothing is a great thing from a security perspective. Do a lot of work to have nothing happen, nothing to go wrong. And nobody likes to pay, and that means in time and effort and money in some cases, depending on what the resources you're putting to bear are. Nobody likes to pay for nothing. They want to pay to see something. Yeah. But so you have to, and it takes time to show an improvement in processes and everything else. So it's again, as I say, that's sort of the bane of anybody that works security. You're important, you're invaluable to the organization. Nobody's going to say they don't want security, but they don't want to have to pay for nothing. And it's again, it's a play on words maybe, but it is a realistic understanding.
Absolutely. And I just want to, for everybody who's watching this today, some of the things you've said today are so important because people, I think, in organizations, a lot of times when they're looking at creating supply chain security programs, they always want to be very cognizant of costs, but understand that really when you're looking at the things that you mentioned that companies can do right away to help mitigate their risks in ensuring that they're vetting their suppliers and their vendors, ensuring that they have good standards in place, ensuring that they have other programs that they're complying with. Those are all compliance things. Those are time and effort. It doesn't cost, yes, you have to do security audits and different things, but it's not a tremendous cost. It's a lot of effort and time and resources.
Yeah, it takes time and effort, and time and manpower is definitely a cost.
Absolutely.
But at the end of the day, it does more for you, and it just gives you a continuity and a surety that your products are the right, they haven't been messed with, they haven't been tampered with. They're getting where they need to be, when they need to be there. There's a lot of things that go into it, but it's an important understanding to look at that and say, there is value here, even if you don't see it immediately. And so it's important that as the security person, you're making people aware of what's going on and what the threats are. And to know that, like you said, a couple of organizations earlier, and there's several of them that have standards that you can follow or at least help guide you. Being parts of those organizations, those associations, be they your industry groups or trade groups of various sorts, you get access to intel that you might not otherwise get. You can see what other people are doing and start talking to them. I mean, some of the best networking that you are going to have in this profession is working in places and talking to other people that have similar issues, situations, and problems as you. And a lot of people worry about that collusion. Are you working with the competition to do something? When you're talking theft and securing, it is not a competitive field. I mean, as you well know, people in this industry in every walk of life. And if you start and build those relationships and those things, more good comes out of that than bad would ever come out of it. I've never seen a security person not willing to help another security person overcome a problem, because if you can solve that problem and make it hard for the bad guys, whoever they are, it is universally a much better solution for everybody. And the world is a better place. The industry is a better place. And a lot of other things happen that would not happen otherwise.
Absolutely. And really, that's the whole crux of this virtual summit, is to get out there and start sharing information from security professionals like yourself to help organizations who either are looking to improve their supply chain programs, or if they're looking to go for a certification such as CTPAT, or even if they're getting TAPA certified, which isn't, again, it's volunteer. They have to understand that if you have these programs in place, your supply chain will be much more secure. You will mitigate those risks to your supply chain. Brad, do you have anything else you'd like to say in closing, sir?
No, thank you for the opportunity today. I encourage everybody to be at least look at what these government supply chain programs are, and internalize what the intent of them are. I mean, no program is perfect, but the more you understand what they're trying to do, and the more you can understand about how your material moves and what the product issues are, what the threats against you are, the better protected you're going to be and your company is going to be. So.
Very good. And Brad's company is called Secure Concepts LLC. I'll put your contact information so that other people can reach out to you if they're looking to improve their programs, so that you can help them further their programs also, and they can engage you as a consultant, because as far as the industry is going, Brad is one of the best. And we really appreciate your time here, and thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us, Brad.
Thank you, George. It's been a pleasure.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.